On today's show, Dwayne Casey is out as the head coach of the Detroit Pistons, but he'll be moving into a front office role with the organization. What is the new role going to look like for Dwayne Casey? What are the expectations for him in this new role? Why was it time to move on from him as the head coach? And what is needed from the next head coach of the Pistons? All of that and more coming up right here at Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Next game, how about Karl-Anthony Towns to score more than 26.5 points? What about LeBron James to have more than 7.5 rebounds? How about Kevin Durant to have less than 6.5 assists? Or maybe even Steph Curry to have more than 3.5 three-pointers made? So what is Prize Picks? It's daily fantasy sports, but how does it work? Basically, you pick 2 to 6 players. If they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 25 times back on your money on any entry that you submit. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. Prize Picks offers projections on any sport that you watch. That's NBA, NFL, MLB, NHL, PGA. They've got you covered for all the action over at Prize Picks. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that simple. They're safe. They offer fast withdrawals. Currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. So download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. So don't forget to enter promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Joining us now is the host of Locked On Pistons, Ku Khahil, who you can find wherever you listen to your podcasts and on YouTube. Just search Locked On Pistons. Ku, the Dwane Casey era has come to an end, sort of, in Detroit. He's stepping away, no longer going to be the head coach of the Pistons, moving into now a front office role in the announcement into the season. First, let's start with just how would you best describe Dwayne Casey and his tenure as the Pistons head coach over these last 5 years?
Oh God. Okay. You hit me with a hard hitter immediately.
That's what we're all about here, Ku. Come on.
I don't know. I don't know how I explain it, because when he was first brought to the Pistons, he was brought here to try to help a team that was trying to win. It was at the time when they had Blake Griffin, Andre Drummond, Reggie Jackson. And for that one season, Blake was great. And they were able to limp into the playoffs, and they got swept by the Bucks. And ever since then, it's been just downhill with the win-loss. They just had their second worst season in franchise history. And over the last 3 seasons, they haven't amounted to 82 wins. So I think Dwayne is a great man. He's a great human. He's a great role model, like all that good stuff. He's a great human being. That's probably the main reason why he's going up into the front office. But this is a business when just looking at the win-loss and everything, it did not go very well. I guess his story, and he said this himself, the outcome of his time with the Pistons will be determined on how these young players end up. Because if they end up turning out really well, he's probably going to get a lot of credit for that, because he was the one that was here with them, helping them become young men, learn how to be an NBA player, develop and stuff. So if they become good players, I'm sure he'll get a ton of credit for that for years to come, that, hey, he was the guy who got them there. He just didn't get to see it through and before they went and got their guy. So I think that's what really is the last hope for his era to be considered like a success, I guess. But I mean, after having like the second worst season in franchise history, I struggle to find any way of trying to spin this in a positive light.
So when you look at Casey's tenure and trying to evaluate him, I mean, what were some of the specific examples of, I guess, shortcomings, throughout his time as and I'm assuming you are firmly behind this decision, right, for the Pistons to move on from him as the head coach.
No, yeah, I'm completely behind it. I had been saying for a while that the Pistons probably need to get a new head coach. I mean, I said this a year and a half ago that this season would probably be his last one, and they would probably move him up into the front office. They weren't going to fire him. They were never going to do that. They respect each other too much. They weren't going to fire him. And he's an older man, and the plan was always to move him up into the front office. So I was behind this decision. I thought it was the decision that they needed to do. But his shortcomings, really, his offense was just so stagnant and very, very I guess the best word is non-creative. The Pistons were not a very good ISO team for a long time, yet they were in the top half of the league in ISO possessions, according to Synergy, and were one of the worst ISO teams in the entire NBA, but continue to have high usage in that area because the offense oftentimes just didn't have much creativity and always boiled down to an ISO here, your turn ISO, your turn ISO. So, and then for a while there, they switched everything on defense, and that didn't translate to good basketball because they didn't have the personnel to do it. They tried doing stuff differently this year, but even then that didn't really work. But Dwayne Casey didn't have a good roster for sure. He didn't have a great roster. Were they trying to win? No. But I feel like some of his issues were more to do with the lack of creativity on the offensive end, which I think kind of tracks back all the way to his Toronto Raptors days if you talk to some people in Toronto.
So with this move and Casey moving into the front office for the Pistons, I mean, what type of a role are we talking here? Do we even know at this point? Is it going to be as just a consultant? Is it going to be as a scout? Like what kind of vision do the Pistons have for his role?
We don't know yet. I'm going to assume it's just as a consultant, as an advisor of some sort. I'd be shocked if it's like some big time role where he's actually having input on like roster decisions and stuff like that. Like I'd be shocked. And actually, if that was the case, I would not be for this. If they're elevating him to the front office position to where he's going to have like input on what they do with the head coaching hire or what they do with the roster and who they draft, like if he's having that kind of input, I'm very much against this because the Pistons, it's not confirmed, but they very likely have a lot of people already in the room. I mean, we've heard that there's a lot of people that are a lot of voices in the front office already, and to add Dwayne Casey there, I don't think he's really earned that if that's what they're going to do. So I'd be shocked if they did that. It'd have to be, for me, I'd assume, just an advisor role, a consultant, a role model for the young guys like that, just to keep them around because they're so used to him, I guess. I mean, that's the guess I'd have, but we don't know for sure yet. They haven't really said anything on it.
There are a handful of reported possible replacements for Dwayne Casey so far, including Bucks assistant Charles Lee, Raptors assistant Adrian Griffin, Ime Udoka, former head coach of the Boston Celtics, Heat assistant Chris Quinn, and some other names not yet mentioned. Ku, what are the Pistons looking for out of their next head coach? What does the next guy need to bring to the table that Casey couldn't or didn't have?
So I just got done recording my own podcast, and I mentioned this exact thing. The Pistons, I like to go back to where Nate McMillan, midway through this past season, he was talking about how he feels like maybe this generation has passed him up. Maybe it's this coaching generation has passed him up. It's a younger generation. It's a new type of basketball being played, and maybe he's just been passed up. I feel like that's what happened with Dwayne Casey. So I want the Pistons to go out and get a young coach who is, I wanted to avoid saying hip to this generation. I don't think it's the right word to use, but basically that's what I'm trying to say. Go get a younger coach that can relate with these young guys. And the name that you mentioned, I think everyone should really keep their eye on with the Pistons job is Chris Quinn of the Miami Heat. He's been a long-term assistant for Eric Spoelstra, a former player. If you guys played NBA 2K, you definitely know who he is. He had a lights out 3-pointer in like 2K10. But he's been a long-time assistant coach for Eric Spoelstra. He's filled in for him when he's sick. When he gets ejected, and even Udonis Haslem, who we know who is the heart and soul of that team, he said of Chris Quinn, when you listen to Quinny, you're hearing Spo, it's the same message. He has the knowledge, the experience, the relationship with players. He has every base covered when you talk about checking the boxes to have the ability to be a successful head coach. So I'm not saying I know exactly who they're going to go after, but if I had to put my money down on someone right now, and there's going to be a ton of candidates, Woj and all of them already tweeted out that the Pistons will be casting a wide variety of potential candidates, going and making sure they do their due diligence. But if at the very early game, if I was forced to put money on someone I'd want the Pistons to go after, it's Chris Quinn of the Miami Heat.
Now, Ku, the Pistons this season, worst record in the NBA, which the good news for the Pistons means they can fall no lower than 5th in the NBA draft lottery. So they will be guaranteed a top 5 pick in some capacity. Now, we heard a lot of talk in the recent weeks that, Brandon Miller may have overtaken Scoot Henderson as the number 2 prospect in this year's NBA draft. There's some question marks, though, about if the Pistons were to land the number 2 pick, right? They've got Cade Cunningham, they've got Jaden Ivey. What direction do you ultimately think that they would go if they landed the number 2 overall pick? Is it just an easy answer and you say Brandon Miller and you're happy with that?
No, I'm telling you this right now, everyone who's listening to this right now, I'll tell you this. If the Pistons draft Brandon Miller at 2, something needs to be checked. If they better not draft Brandon Miller at 2. So this is the thing. Not getting Scoot has all to do with the Pistons already having 2 good guards. But the problem is Scoot Henderson is just a wild prospect that you can't pass up on. If they do want to go the fit route with Brandon Miller, if they do get the second pick and they want to go the fit route with Brandon Miller, you better be trading back. There's no way value-wise you should be taking Brandon Miller over Scoot at 2. And if you can't trade back, I almost would rather say, I was just talking about this in the podcast last week, that if drafting Scoot at 2, at some point, one of these young guys are going to be traded down the line. Very rarely through rebuilds do all the young guys survive through it. Eventually, some of the young guys, some of the good, talented young guys get flipped for that win now star, for that superstar down the road. Who's netting you more value at this point? Who has more value as a player? Scoot Henderson, the generational prospect that would be number 1 if it wasn't for Victor Wembanyama, or Brandon Miller, who you'd reach at 2. So in any scenario at 2, you better either be drafting Scoot Henderson and then looking down the line, if they don't work out, Jaden, Cade, and Scoot, then you're able to flip a really good asset and get a guy who's ready to help you win now, and they would acquire more for you than Brandon Miller would. Or if you really like Brandon Miller, you trade back and you get him somewhere else. But in no way should they be taking Brandon Miller at 2. If they do that, I might jump out this back window right here.
What will the future hold for Dwane Casey as a member of the Pistons front office? Who will ultimately be the Pistons' next head coach? You're going to have us covered for all of that and more over at Locked On Pistons. Ku, I appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Appreciate you.